Hi there, welcome back. We're going to continue looking at modern warfare here as we begin part two. But before we even really get into continuing what we were looking at, I want to show you a clip that I couldn't fit in the previous video called Polite Warfare. So let me cue that up here. This clip is going to make fun of the old way of fighting from the first generation of modern warfare. This was the kind of warfare that was fought during the American Revolution, during the American Civil War, during a lot of the Napoleonic Wars. And what you're going to see in the middle is this guy who is clearly an aristocrat, clearly the commanding officer giving directions. And these men are basically standing there waiting for the other side to shoot at them, which is how warfare was fought. It's really sort of silly, and this clip definitely makes fun of that, but this would have been a representation of the first generation of modern warfare. So let's go ahead and take a look.
All right, men, here comes the American army. Let's look sharp. Remember, the first impression is the lasting impression. My God, they haven't even got proper uniforms on. All right, okay, all right, no guffawing, no guffawing, no guffawing. Here we go. Oh, I say hello there. Yes, hello. You are the American Army, I presume. Very good. Yes, I am Commander Livingston of His Majesty's Royal Military, and we are here to do battle. Although, I do believe that we did agree upon noon. Is that correct? It's not a problem. It's all right. It's just in the future. When you say you're going to be someplace, it's in everything. Okay, very good, very good. Shall we have at it then? All right, would you like to take a few moments to get ready? You're ready now. They're ready now.
It's hardly a formation there.
All right, all right. No guffawing. I've said this. Okay, very good. Very well, since we are the assaulting army, you have the privilege of taking the first volley, right? And then we shall return, and so on and so forth. So, Godspeed. Let's have a good one, and good luck to you. All right, men. Now, let's show them what we Brits are made of. Stand your ground. Oh! You've got one! Good shot! Very good shot, actually. That was Timothy. He's our maps and navigations expert. We'll be in a pinch without him. Good form. All right? Now it's our turn to take a volley, so... Ho-ho! All right, men. Let's get ready. Muskets at the ready. And, do me a favor, let's have a little fun with this. Try and pick the one you think might be their maps and navigations expert, right? Right. Hey! No! Now you've had your turn, you've just taken 2 volleys and we haven't even had one. Now, I know that for a lot of you Americans this is your first parlay, but there are rules in modern warfare. We're not dumb beasts, right? Now, since you've taken 2 volleys, we will take 2 volleys, and then you may return fire. You're, in effect, losing a turn. Right. Hey! Now you know the rules. I've just explained them to you. This battle's barely even started yet, and I'm down to only a handful of men. You're doing very poorly in this war, I might say. Now, we will take 3 volleys, and I do believe we should be allowed the privilege to move forward 5 meters because of your willful violation. Oh! Who took a shot at the CO? You took a shot at the... Reprimand that man! Reprimand that man! I will file a very important...
All right, that scene, although hilarious, gives you an idea of what fighting used to be like, and it's a little bit more intense than that, of course. They're making fun of it, but at the same time, there's some truth to it. And so we need to advance beyond that as we have muskets and rifles that can do a lot of damage, and you want to try to save lives in that process. Part of the problem is you need people, you need soldiers, and so you have to use a conscription, which is a draft. Conscription, we started seeing, this started during the French Revolution, during the time of Napoleon. During the French Revolution, sorry, that's a little redundant. The idea was, this came from a guy named Jean-Baptiste Jourdan, who said, any Frenchman is a soldier and owes himself to the defense of the nation. So a lot of different groups throughout history have required military service. It's been part of their taxes, part of how they help out with the state. But conscription really started in the 1800s here with the French. Between 1800 and 1813, 2.6 million men were conscripted. So we have people basically being forced to fight. This was soon copied by other European nations, and there's been tremendous growth during the World Wars. The U.S., we had the Selective Service Program. Britain had the call-up program. Germany had Volkssturm, or the People's Storm. Netherlands had service duty. They're all meaning the same thing. They're all basically a draft. And in order to get enough people to serve, especially as wars get bigger and bigger and bigger, you need to force people to come fight. Certainly, there's going to be some violent reactions to this. There's a Canadian conscription crisis of 1944 where people fought back. And even here in the United States, in Vietnam, we had people who were protesting all over the country and didn't want to be called up to fight for a war that they didn't truly understand as we were fighting the communists in the 1960s. Here's a map that shows modern conscription. What you see here is in green means they don't have an armed force, so like Greenland up here. Blue means they don't have enforced conscription anymore. We don't have that anymore. Doesn't mean we can't bring it back, but we currently don't have it. Yellow means they're going to get rid of it, and red means, yes, they still do have conscription. So you can see there's a lot of countries out there that still believe in this. All right, let's move on to the second generation of warfare. This was started by the French during World War I. And really what the second generation of warfare starts to look like is mass firepower. You start using artillery. You set this far behind the enemy lines, and you launch bombs and shells as far as you can. It's indirect artillery fire. The idea is you're trying to push the enemy back. The goal is also attrition, which is to kill as many people as you can, but you can certainly try to force them to surrender in the same process. So the quote became, the artillery conquers, the infantry occupies. So you move your troops in to take overland, and the artillery is what's going to help them get in there and help them conquer. So artillery, you launch shells all the way over, and this is a picture of no man's land from World War I. You can see it's absolutely craters, and there's no more trees left because artillery has absolutely destroyed the land there. And if you're an army who's being having this artillery launch at them, you're certainly going to think twice about moving forward and maybe even consider moving backwards. In second generation of warfare, as we continue, infantry, tanks, and artillery were a conducted battle. It was planned. It was organized. It was meant, again, to have an army push forward and try to push that enemy army backwards. Certainly, what we mean by conducted battle is almost like a conductor of an orchestra, and the commander became the conductor of the orchestra or the conductor of the military here. Now, in order for this to work, you had to have discipline and obedience on the battlefield. This was far more important than the initiative, going first and having the military advantage. You had to have your men who were willing to fight and see this through. Hence why you see men just getting mowed down in World War I and getting blown apart by artillery because they're commanded to do so, and that's awful. But it was necessary to move your enemy backwards by having your force move forward. This is still relevant to today. In a way, we sort of use this. We definitely believe very strongly in discipline of our soldiers. You cannot desert. You cannot leave the military. You're not allowed to do that. America called this putting steel on the target. As we launch artillery, we're launching a lot of steel and a lot of shells at the enemy, certainly trying to take them out and push them back at the same time. The only change is aviation eventually replaces artillery, meaning once we have planes, we can fly planes over and they can drop the bombs rather than having large artillery guns behind the targets firing towards the enemy. Kind of see an idea here exploding. This is an artillery shell exploding during World War I. Now, the third generation of warfare is a byproduct of World War I's trench warfare. Trench warfare was awful. You had to fight in these trenches in order to not get your head blown off or get shot if you got outside of the trench. And this is not based on attrition, but it's based on speed and surprise. Again, attrition is killing. What you're trying to do is use blitzkrieg, which is what the Germans used in World War II. You try to be quick, you try to be decisive, and you try to bring the fight to them as quickly so they don't have time to maneuver, they don't have time to plan any counterattacks. Now, many different weapons found their introduction here. One of them is the flamethrower. So through the introduction of flamethrowers, Germans found out that the initiative was more important than orders. So this is a very big difference. You see them just moving in quickly, trying to take the initiative, again, which is going first, and trying to kill and do as much damage right away so the enemy doesn't have time to regroup. And it worked pretty well for Hitler in World War II. However, Sun Tzu would not agree with this. Sun Tzu was far more about tactics and saving your own lives rather than just plowing through the enemy with speed and force. Of course, that leads us to talking about transportation. You can't do this if you don't have proper transportation. The development of locomotives is going to help so you can move around troops and supplies. Definitely the speed of transporting your resources is going to help one side be more successful than the others. If you can't get food, water, men, and ammunition to the battle site, you're not going to be able to fight. Certainly this led to the development of countermeasures like destroying train tracks or Sherman neckties, which were bombs that took out tanks. People are going to react. If they find out that tanks and trains are what's giving the enemy the advantage, you're going to try to take out those trains and tanks. So that's what the countermeasures are here. You're going to use jeeps, cars, and tanks. This is specifically in the last 100 to 120 years. Tanks dramatically changed warfare, especially by the time post-World War I into post-World War II. Tanks just really, they're in a lot of ways, they're hard to attack. They have a lot of firepower on them, and they represent sometimes that first line of defense. And if you have that, it can be very difficult to fight against it if you don't have it. Picture of a tank here from World War II. I was going to show you the trailer for Fury. We don't have time to do that, so I'm going to skip that. And that brings us to the nuclear weapon age. The first atomic bomb that was created in the 1940s had 20,000 tons of TNT and its explosive power. That's huge, but we continue to advance nuclear weapons. The first hydrogen bomb, which was detonated in the late 1940s, was worth 10 million tons of TNT. Look at the difference there. We've now increased the exploding power by 500 times. It's 500 times bigger. And this is the first time in the history of the world that we see the chance of global annihilation. We have all these weapons, all these powers that have them, and if one person drops an atomic bomb, the other side's gonna, and it's gonna go back and forth. It's a really scary thought. This has led to the decrease in large-scale conflict. For example, in the Vietnam conflict, we only had about 4 million soldiers on both sides combined. That's nowhere near the millions and millions and millions of soldiers that were used in the World War II. So nowhere near World War II numbers. See, the idea here is a picture of after the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in Japan. You see charred bodies, charred buildings, things like that. I'm going to skip over that slide. The funny thing is they taught kids to duck and cover under their desks. So hide under the desk, they say. You'll be safe, they said. Some of your grandparents might have actually participated in these duck and cover drills. Of course, they were never going to save any lives. An atomic bomb is going to wipe out that whole school. Who's involved in modern warfare? Well, modern warfare targeted civilians and civilian infrastructure. Bombing of Britain, Berlin, and Tokyo are great examples of this. Civilians were lost in all of those battles in World War II. Why? Well, basically, some of the reason you start hitting civilians is because they're helping in the war effort. They might not be fighting on the battlefield, but they're helping in the war effort, so it can decrease workers in factories, which means decrease in weapons and ammunition. Certainly demoralize the enemy. The battle space, strategic system set up to integrate combined armed forces. So basically what this is going to involve is all sorts of different groups working together. We mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to show you how this works with the Navy, Army, Air Force, etc. So we can see on this slide, you've got in the air, you've got your Air Force, which can give you information on the ground, and the water, you've got your Navy communicating to forces on the land. I'm going through this kind of quickly, but it gives you an idea. You can certainly pause and take a better look at this if you want. But the idea is that all these different groups in the battle space are going to work together. That brings us to the fourth generation of warfare. The fourth generation or future of warfare is heavily debated. Some believe it's our current state of warfare, which is small, flexible, and forced with little structure. I mean, we don't send as many troops as we used to. We have smart bombs, we have drones, we have weapons that can be fired thousands of miles away and hit a target within a square foot of accuracy. But one of the big changes with fourth generation of warfare is non-state actors against state forces. What do I mean by that? It's groups like terrorist groups such as the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and ISIS. These groups that don't belong to one particular country. They don't belong to one state. They kind of encompass a lot of different groups or ideologies. So warfare is changing a lot in the modern world, and that's what some people see as the fourth generation of warfare. Certainly new weapons and modes of attack are being developed to counter the decentralization of war. Governments are trying to operate in the new world of warfare within the second and third generation tactics. It's a lot more humane than dropping large bombs on people and killing hundreds of thousands of people at one time. So you're going to continue to see people try to operate in that second and third generation rather than moving to the fourth generation. Because once we get to the fourth generation, we can actually see the annihilation of lots of people on the planet. And that's a real fear that we have to live with, as those weapons can never be uninvented. We can never uninvent the atomic bomb. We have it, many other countries have it, and we just hope nobody uses it. Of course, we saw some of this in Black Hawk Down. I would say Black Hawk Down definitely represented the second and third generation of warfare. Not so much looking at that fourth generation, which is good, because when you have casualties on both sides, you get a very human element of it, and those who survive can go back and tell those stories. Or if all of a sudden we just dropped a bomb on Mogadishu, or they dropped a bomb on us, it's going to prompt us to do the same to them, and vice versa, and you get much bigger scale war out of that. So Black Hawk Down did not represent the fourth generation of warfare. All right, let's bring this lecture to a close. We've looked at a lot of really important things, starting with gunpowder and really looking at 4 generations of warfare, really starting with the first generation, setting up battle lines, which is state versus state. Second generation of warfare is really mass warfare that was started by the French in World War I. Third generation really takes that trench warfare and adds a lot of speed and surprise to it. And fourth generation, some people are saying that's where we're at now, where you're really fighting some ideologies like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, not necessarily state versus state, and certainly you throw nuclear weapons in that as well. But we come back to our 2 learning targets here. First one says summarize the warfare techniques and strategies used in the modern world, and I think we can use those 4 generations to really summarize modern warfare. And then the last question, compare and contrast ancient, medieval, and modern warfare based on Sun Tzu's principles. Hopefully we can really just see how warfare has changed, really from the ancient world to the modern world, and certainly gunpowder is the big game changer, but we can also see how Sun Tzu's principles really kind of stay constant through all that, things like deception and, trying to obtain the high ground or not fighting against the high ground, things like that really Sun Tzu had figured out hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So that's going to do it for us on this unit on warfare. You've definitely seen a good look at ancient, medieval, and modern warfare. Hope you've learned something. We'll see you next time.